Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for watching. Whether you're watching with me live or you're watching the recording, I appreciate the fact that you are watching. All right, so today we're starting Module 3. We got a lot to cover in Module 3. That's why we have 3 weeks to do it. We're covering just some basic MySQL queries. One of the things that we talked about over the previous modules is one of the parts of the language of MySQL is that it is a query language, which means that I can query data that exists in a table. And I can take that data and I can run it through a process based on a sequence of specifiers or a sequence of qualifiers, I guess, would be a better set of terms for that, and turn it into information. Right, and so that's what kind of Module 3 focuses on, is the idea of this data querying language. And then in Module 4, we kind of look at the data manipulation language. And in Module 5, we have the data normalization as a process. Which leads us into your final project. So we've got about 3 weeks to cover just general queries. And we're going to start pretty slow. All right, we're going to start at the beginning, basically. And the way that I like to handle these modules is I like to kind of look at the problem, look at what we want to do, and then kind of expand out from there and talk about how we would do that with our query. And so we're just going to kind of go from problem to problem to problem to problem, examining different things and then looking at different examples of how we would show those problems. So we'll be back and forth a lot between our slide presentation explaining theory and our MySQL workbench doing some practice and demonstration, right? So there's a lot of stuff there, and then a big part of the whole thing, as we get more little pieces that we can kind of add to our queries will become more complex, right? And we'll start to, as we move forward, we'll start to develop more complex questions for ourselves that we'll be able to answer with our data. Based on what we can build queries with. So I got a set number of slides, a set number of problems I want us to cover for today. And so we may as well go ahead and get started here. Once we, kind of the way that I look at this is once we kind of get that material covered that I want to get covered for this week, we can just kind of move on to the next, go ahead and end what we're doing this week and save everything else for next week. So the first one here is simple. We've already seen several examples of it. And the problem is that we want to see all the data that's in a table. And one of the things that I've suggested to you all is that this is a place where we really need to start with every single problem, every single question that we're presenting to ourselves as we are starting to work with MySQL and working with data, especially in these situations where we have such an easy data set to work with, right? Where our data set is so small, right? We have a table and we want to see all the data in a table. And we have the asterisk selector. That we can use in a select statement, and that is something that we were kind of using and seeing previously in our examples. We didn't really explain why it works or how it works. We just did a little demonstration that it does work. And so when we write a general select statement, if we want to select everything in a table, we can select asterisk from a particular table. And that will bring us everything from a particular table. Now, the interesting thing about our asterisk is asterisk really has a special meaning in SQL. It's used a lot for this special meaning, basically in a lot of different things in programming, right? The asterisk or star character, right? It's the shift 8 key on your keyboard, and it's the wildcard character, and it means in this case, right? It means everything. Return every column and every bit of data. And I always find it interesting because it might not have been intended, right? But I'm reminded of the film The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The film and the book, right? You might have read the book. You might have seen the film. Book came first, obviously. Right? Us older nerds read the book first, and then saw the film as it was made later on. But Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there was an all-knowing being that was asked the question, what is the meaning to life, the universe, and everything? The meaning to life, the universe, and everything. To which this being responded, 42. 42. And I'm going to actually write 42 here on our screen. We're going to come back to it in just a second here. Because, I'm bringing this up for a reason. I'm not just bringing it up just to be bringing it up. It does have something that's kind of interesting to it. Right? Because we said that, the asterisk means everything when it's in sequel, right? Like when we are selecting the asterisk character, we are selecting everything from a table and we were bringing it back. If you know anything about CSS, right, when we use our asterisk selector in CSS, that allows us to select everything on the page and make changes to it. One of the interesting things is how our computers see characters. Right? If you know anything about how our computers see characters, our computers use a lookup table that is called an ASCII table. ASCII. And so a character has a corresponding decimal value that's converted to binary that the computer can then understand. Bleep, bloop, bleep, bloop, right? It just takes the character, converts it to a sequence of ones and zeros that the computer can understand, and then the computer builds a representation of what it understands as a symbol on the screen based on the ASCII value of that symbol. Well, something that's very interesting. And I don't believe, I think I've seen interviews to this effect where the author, Douglas Adams, has said that this was not their intention. That it was just sort of a lucky coincidence. But if we look on an ASCII table and we look at the value of the character that corresponds to the number 42, what is the meaning of everything? Well, it is an asterisk. It's our wildcard selector. So what does everything mean? Well, it just means everything. Right? We can't just sum it up nice and neatly, right? It's 42. It's everything. ASCII 42. And just to show you that really quickly, just to pull over that ASCII table that we like to show from time to time. Here's our ASCII table. And if we zoom right in on 42 right here, we see that it is an asterisk. Really interesting, really neat, just something kind of a little bit different. Something to kind of think about there. Right, maybe not what the author intended, but something for us to kind of think about as we're thinking about, using the asterisk selector in our projects. And our query looks something like this, right? Like it's just the asterisk selector. And in this case, we are selecting asterisk from customers. And the sample queries that we see in our slideshow presentation, a little bit different than, what we see in our sample database that we're using with our tennis database, just so you can kind of see that, it's not just stuck to our tennis database, right? Like different database names, different table names, different column names. We'll even create and work with a different table later on. And that's neither here nor there. Now, if we look at our MySQL workbench here, we can do some example queries with this, right? Now, if we are, just opening up our MySQL workbench for the first time today, like I am, one of the things I might want to do is I might want to run my use tennis command. And just to remind myself of the name of the tables, I'm going to run my show tables command, which is what we use to show all of the tables that are in our workbench. So now I'm using the tennis database that we have imported in here that we did with module 2 when we set up our environment. And I can see here all of the tables that I have in here. I have my committee members table, I have my matches table, my penalties table, my players table, and my teams table. So the players table, I believe, has the most data in it. And so it's the one that you're probably going to be working with the most. And so whenever I'm going to be working with a table, especially one that has a lot of data in it, one of the things that I always like to do is just kind of have it show up there. So show asterisk from players would be the command we would run to be able to, or not show, what am I doing? Select asterisk from players. My brain's already in fall break mode, even though I don't get a fall break. What do you know? Select asterisk from players. That's going to return to me all of the player information for that table, which we can see there, right? All of the player information. If you'll remember back to when I was setting up my environment in here, one of the things that I did was I made the font larger, so it's taking up way more of the window. But again, another one of the things that we can do is we can have multiple commands that we can run at once. So if I want to show everything from multiple tables all at once, select star from penalties, let's say. What's another one? Select star from teams. Right, these will all give us different tabs that will show us everything from each of these different tables, right? We have our players tab, our committee members tab, our penalties tab, and our teams tab. And while we're getting started here, for the first couple of weeks as we're dealing with this module, we're really only dealing with one table. We're kind of only dealing with one table at a time. As we progress, when we get toward the third week of this module, we'll start working with multiple tables at a given time. Right, but with where we're at right now, we're only working with one table at a time. And, this is all well and good, right, if we are only looking for, all of the data from a specific table, right? But in general, that's not incredibly useful for us, right? Like, this is probably the least useful query that we can write, with the exception of, if we're looking at it from the perspective of, kind of looking at the data and comparing it against some other query we wrote just to kind of check ourselves and make sure we did things properly, right? Especially as we're getting started. Because if we just select everything from a table, there's no real, there's no real querying there, right? There's no real process being done. You're just saying kind of show me everything, right? One of the things that we talked about before is the idea of kind of the waiter, right? Like we have this waiter. This waiter is, we've sat down with our menu. We've looked at our waiter. We basically can't make up our minds. And we basically tell our waiter, you know what, just bring me one of everything. I can't make up my mind. I don't know what I want. Just bring me one of everything. Right? And that's really not incredibly useful for us. So we need to start to be able to narrow this down a little bit so we can make some better decisions for ourselves. So let's kind of approach a new problem. Maybe we only want to get a subset of rows. From our table. All right, well now we have the where clause for us to deal with this. The where clause. Where clause sounds pretty good. Right, so we can get everything from the table where it matches a certain condition. Right, and so for those of you who have done a decent amount of other programming, right, we can kind of think of our where clause as this conditional. Right, and when we get on the next slide, we'll see that, we use the same operators that we might use in a conditional or if statement. Right, we'll see that a where clause can use, equals and greater than and less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, our not operator. Right, and this is when we only want to see rows that satisfy a specific condition. Right, and so our where clause returns the rows where the expression is true. So if we kind of think about our conditional in regular programming as, it returns these clauses if our condition is true. Our where statement, our where clause, where this statement is true, we're going to return the data. Right? We're still not getting very specific in the type of data that we're returning. We're still returning the entire row, but we're only returning the entire row that meets a specific criteria. And we see here that MySQL supports all of our common operators in our where clause. Including that last one there, which is really less than common, right? The less than greater than, which is another form of a not. The less than greater than. Or actually, is that another form of an equals or another form of a not? It's another form of it's a weird one. I don't like to use it. So we kind of avoid it where we can. Here's an example of one, right? We can only select the rows. So we're going to select everything. We're going to select all the information from our customers table where the customer ID is greater than 50. So we're only going to return our customers information if the customer ID is greater than 50. And what would be the benefit of being able to do something like this, right? Well, maybe we want to just find newer customers, right? Maybe we know that our newer customers have an ID of, 100 or higher. And so we can run a quick query that would give us all that information back. Maybe we want to look at a query for people that are from a specific place. We can do this as well using an equals operator. Right, so let's just do a few examples here, utilizing our where clause and just pulling back specific information based on a condition. Right, so let's start out by just writing a query that will pull back our entire players table. Right, so we're going to run a select star from players. We'll go ahead and run that so we can see everything that's in there. And we see a lot of things that are useful here. Right, so let's say that we only want the players whose player numbers are in the triple digits. Right, so in this case, that's going to be P. Parmenter, D. Mormon, and IP Bailey. Right, well, we could have hundreds of others, right? We want to ignore anybody's who, lower than 100, basically. So we can select star. The star here, again, is just going to select the entire row. Right? It's just going to select the entire row of information from players where player number greater than. Now we could say greater than or equal to 100. Or we could just say greater than 99, right? Because 99 is not greater than 99, it is equal to 99. So this would work for us as it stands. So this would give us every player, this would give us all the information for every player who had a player number that's greater than 100. So when we run this, it's still going to give us this bit here, where we're going to get all the information for all the players that are in the players table. And now we're going to get this new bit of information, where we're going to get all the information from the players in the player table, where their player number is over 99. So 100 and higher. We run that. Now we see what we have here. These are the results of that second query. We have P. Parmenter, D. Mormon, and IP Bailey there, just as we expected. Right, so we can do that with a number like that, like we've done there. We can also do it with terms as well. Right, if we want just somebody with the same first initials. Right, like let's say we wanted somebody who has the letter R as their first initials. Right, so let's just write a query here. Select asterisk from players where initials equals R. That'll work like that. That should give me R. Everett, R. Parmenter. Those are the only two. And there they are, right? All of their information. Looks pretty good. Maybe we want everybody from Stratford. right? So let's write one more query here. Select asterisk from players where town equals Stratford. Remember that these are strings, right? So a string is going to be representative of what is in the container. So I don't necessarily want to, mess up the capitalization here. While the commands, while it's friendly with the commands and the column headings, if I were to run something like that, it might or might not, depending on the application, be friendly with me. In this instance, it is, right? We can see that, hey, all caps here. It actually worked just fine. And we actually have all Stratfords here working for me. So that is an instance where SQL is a fairly friendly language that we can kind of write some code in. Right, in a lot of other languages that we deal with, they're very particular about uppercase versus lowercase. MySQL, not so much. Right, so our where here is relatively simple. Right, so let's get rid of these. And so that's all well and good if we want to satisfy one condition. But typically we want to satisfy more than one condition. So let us talk about that sort of problem. So what if we want to satisfy more than one condition with a SQL query? Well, we have options for that, right? We don't necessarily have the ability to write more than one where statement, right? As we're kind of writing our statement, we're just basically writing one statement. But we can write an or an and clause to bring in there. And if I write an or clause, either part 1 or part 2 can be true to return them back, to make the clause true and make them return their record to my results. If I use an and clause, both parts have to be true. And actually, I have this on a slide, right? So in this instance, we can use a combination of and, or, and a parentheses, right, to return rows that satisfy multiple conditions. So I actually need to take these multiple conditions and wrap them in a parentheses. The presence of the parentheses causes conditions within them to be evaluated together. So if we look at an example here, select asterisk from customers where customer ID is greater than 50 and country equals USA. In this case, what we're saying here is that both, in order for it to return a record, both the customer ID has to be greater than 50 and the country has to be USA for the record to be returned here and for this to be true. So if we look back at our players table here. All right, I accidentally deleted that out, so let's just write that back really quickly. Our select star from players. Got a lot of information here. Let's say I want all the players who either have a player number that's greater than 100 or live in Stratford. Right, so I got a bunch of players that live in Stratford, right? If we look at our town here in our in our select asterisk from players statement here, right? We see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players that live in Stratford. One of them overlaps, being Parmenter. He's one of the 3. He's also one of the 3 that has a player number over 100. So I can select asterisk from players where, in parentheses, town, right? We're going to take the town. I'm going to set that equal to Stratford. Or player number greater than 99. Right, so that should give me all of these, Parmenter, Mormon, and Bailey, in addition to everybody that is from Stratford. So let's run that. Let's see them show up. All right, there we see them. Everybody from Stratford, right? Or everybody whose player number is greater than 99, which would be Parmenter, Mormon, and Bailey. Now, there is only one player that satisfies both of these requirements. So if we run this same query, but we switch that OR operator to an AND operator, then we should expect to only see P Parmenter as the results in that table. All right, so now, we started, that kind of takes us a long way for today. Right, and I think that's probably going to be where we stop for today. Let me just check my notes really quickly here. We can probably do columns really quickly, because all we do for columns is we just... Yeah, we can do columns really quickly. Or, well... Yeah, we can do columns really quickly. Because the next thing is we want to... If we want to return a subset of information. So let's do that really quickly. But before we do that, let's just kind of dial in on what we've covered today so far, right? We started out by just getting everything, right? That's our select star. And now we've been able to dial it into where we can get a singular record. Now, before we go here, we're going to be able to get a singular item from a singular record. Right, maybe I just want to get the birth date from this person here. Right, and it's just as simple as this, right? It's just as simple as that. Right, putting the name of the column in that you want to recover. If you want multiple columns, you can separate them with commas. But before I get too deep into the weeds with that, let me pull up my slideshow. Right, so if you have a table and you want to see values for specific columns, rather than all of the columns that are in the table, you can specify the columns you're interested in. By specifying the columns that you're interested in your select clause, you can ensure that no extraneous data is returned. Right, like let's say I just wanted to pull a list of birthdays so I can make a bulletin board at the tennis courts that just has everybody's birthday on it. I don't need all that other information on there. I don't need the user ID, their player ID and all this other kind of stuff. I just need their name. I need when their birthday is. Right, and so all I have to do is put that name of that column in the place of the asterisk. If I have more than one that I want to put there, I just separate them by columns. Right, so in this instance, if I want to get that, if I want to get the name and initials, also whatever order I put them in here is what order they're going to be returned back to me. So if I want first initial first, initials, comma, name, comma, birth date from players. That'll give it to me for specifically P Parmenter. But I could also get it from everybody. Right? So let's do it once for everybody here. By just getting rid of the where part of this clause. And at that point I have the initials, I have the name, I have the birth date or the date of birth. And one of the things that we'll talk about next week is we'll talk about the alias. Which will allow us to create a more meaningful title for a column on our output. But we'll save that for next week. Right? So we can kind of review a little bit from here. We will pick back up. I've actually covered all of the slides that I want to cover for this week. This leaves me plenty to cover for next week in roughly the same, that we'll have roughly the same amount of time to cover. Right, we've gone from big to small in the amount of things that we can cover, breaking down data. Right, hopefully you can start to see that, it's actually quite simple. A lot of this is just being able to wrap your head around the problems that you're being asked to solve. Right, just like any other programming problems that we have. So that's all that I have for you for today. We'll hang out in the chat for just a couple moments, just in case anybody who's here with me live has any questions. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.